glow-in-the-dark paint first hit the scene in the early 1900s with the arrival of UNDARK, a hot new paint pigment. And when I say hot, I mean hot. This UV reactive pigment was made with radium-226, and as the name implies, radium is radioactive. UNDARK gained infamy with the poisoning of the Radium Girls, a group of factory workers who applied the luminescent paint to watch hands in a dial factory. To maintain consistently thin lines, they would twirl the tips of their tongues of their brushes, ingesting the radioactive paint daily. It wasn't their fault. The Radium Girls were not only told by their employers that the paint was safe, they were instructed to lip, dip, and paint by their supervisors. These women believed their employers so much so that they painted their nails, teeth, and faces with the radioactive paint. That is, until some of them started to get sick with radium jaw. Symptoms of this disease include bleeding gums, bone tumors, facial distortion, necrosis of the lower mandible, and death. As workers, the Radium Girls took on risks they did not understand because the actual cost was hidden from them by their employers. As a result, thousands of women unknowingly sacrificed their health and lives, all for the convenience of being able to sell the ability to see in the dark. The Radium Girls offer a complete story of the hazards of radium paint, but how did something so awful happen in the first place? Today, we're going to be talking about the inventor of radium paint and the company he started. Thanks for joining me today for Creative Hazard Storytime. I'm your host, Michael, and this is the story of UNDARK, the radioactive paint. Dr. Simon von Sikorsky invented radium paint in 1908. What I mean by invented is that he added radium to a binder and recognized the market potential. Not exactly rocket appliances, but definitely rudimentary radioactive science. By 1914, he had opened up a small laboratory in New York City and developed a commercially viable paint formula. With a capital investment of $500,000, which is about $12 million in today's money, he began production in New York at the Radium Luminous Materials Corporation. It would be renamed the United States Radium Corporation 7 years later. The U.S. Radium Corp building is also a U.S. Superfund site. For those that don't know, a Superfund is a federal program that pays for the cleanup of sites contaminated with hazardous substances and pollutants. It's a statistic that 70% of the funding comes from Superfund sites. It's a statistic that 70% of the funding for Superfund sites comes from the companies responsible. But the U.S. Radium Corp went defunct in 1970, 13 years before Superfund designation. From 1914 to 1970, the U.S. Radium Corporation processed an average of 1,000 pounds of radioactive ore daily, which was dumped on site. Over 250 homes and businesses were contaminated with radiation in this time. From 1983 to 2005, the site was cleaned up through remediation and removal of radioactive material. Over 1,600 tons of material was removed from the site, which also contaminated the surrounding area. Florence E. Wall, Sikorsky's lab assistant and cosmetological chemist in 1970, recalls her observations on site in early days of radioactive in industry.
Busy with war contracts, the radium extraction plant operated day and night.
See, they began manufacturing in the middle of World War I, and that meant plenty of military contracts for glowing rifle sights, instruments, and control panels. This demand was obvious stressor on production, and when that happens, output takes precedence over safety. Wall's writings also tell of the constant stream of materials and odd items sent to be painted.
To the rear, there was a constant stream of cars that unloaded carnotite ore, and from various factories throughout the country, boxes of equipment to be touched up with luminous paint.
Despite working directly with radioactive ore during extraction, Wall lived to the age of 95. Her writings highlight the fact that chemists at the plant used protective equipment as part of their safety procedures. Why these procedures were disregarded for the application side of manufacturing is dubious at best. Ultimately, this radioactive pigment contaminated the environment, destroyed a community, cost lives, and continues to have a detrimental effect to this day. The Radium Luminous Materials Corporation knew that it was dangerous way back in 1970, as evident from the precautions their chemists took while making the paint. They encouraged their workers to lick the radioactive brushes because they thought they could get away with it. The icing on the cake is that they also expose the general public to thousands of gallons of radioactive paint. And consider this, all those radioactive painted items are still out there somewhere. So 5 radium girls chose to sue the U.S. Radium Corporation. They eventually won, but the Radium Corporation found a unique scapegoat. They blamed their illnesses on their promiscuity and said that they had contracted syphilis. So that is where they said the radium jaw came from, even though they knew otherwise. Does karma exist? In this story, it does in some sense. Dr. Sikorsky, inventor of UNDARK and founder of the United States Radium Corporation, and the man responsible for every drop of radium paint on this earth, would not escape the horrors of his creation. Toothless and fingerless, he died on November 14th, 1928, at the age of 45. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this broadcast of Creative Hazard Storytime. Special thanks to our patrons, Laura G, Terry R, Donna J, Aaron J, Aaron F, Peter G, and David G. They make this project sustainable. I can't tell you what it means to me that you support this idea, so thank you very much. If you enjoyed this video, check out the rest in the Creative Hazard Storytime series, and if you made it this far, why don't you thumb that like button for me? Okay? Just, like that. Anyways, thanks again for watching. I hope to see you next time. Seriously, just subscribe if you're not subscribed. And P.S. in case you were wondering, the heads of the U.S. Radium Corporation saw the writing on the wall. In 1968, after just half a century of bad press, the company realized it was time to restructure. They closed plants, consolidated operations to produce high-tech glow sticks and wayfinding signage. In 1979, a shiny new corporation was created to hold the assets of their manufacturing plant. Operations weren't left out of this corporation restructuring either, as each got their own subsidiary companies. In 1980, U.S. Radium Corporation created a new holding company, USR Industries Inc., which then absorbed the U.S. Radium Corporation. The EPA declined to renew their license in 2005 before designating the site as another Superfund. This was the final end of the U.S. Radium Corporation. Well, at least the corporation, which are people, don't forget.
Corporations are people, my friend. We can raise taxes on, of course they are. Everything corporations earn ultimately goes to people. So, where do you think it goes? What? Whose pockets? Whose pockets? People's pockets. Okay, human beings, my friend. So number one.